yutzes.
I feel so. I feel.
Now you really can't say anything bad because it's live.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
I would say, as the chair of this committee, as we all know, a very august position to have, chair of committees. We are here for the Thesis Defense of Catherine Hashimoto, we will primarily be discussing her thesis submission, which is 127 pages of a novel, and I'm glitching on the full title right now. Will you remind me of the title?
Yeah, working title, really. Sign of the Moon.
Yeah. Sign of the Moon, that's
Yeah.
right. I always keep trying to put an adjective or something, sign of the, something moon, bloody moon, or maybe because of that canoe.
Yeah,
I don't know, I think maybe the canoe needs to be in the title.
maybe.
Moon and canoe, canoe and moon. We
Yeah.
can talk about that.
Yeah.
But this is called a defense, but it is in no way actually a defense. The thesis itself is a defense, and we'll be talking to you. But it's more in the nature, I think, of a presentation. We'll ask you questions, although I've asked you every pertinent question I think I have at other times. We'll take maybe we'll take maybe an hour to do the whole thing. They're not the kind of marathon sessions that they were in my young days before I got stroppy enough to tell people to stop that. And so, but we'll talk about it. It's a good piece of work, and I've already signed off on it. So I anticipate there will be no great difficulty in moving forward. I anticipate my colleagues, if they had not thought that it was a defensible thesis, probably wouldn't have joined us, and so here we are. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I would be surprised. And so, Catherine, this is your capstone experience here. You've been here a long time now, longer than most people. You've been here, 3.5 years now in a 3-year program, so we may question your wisdom about that. But you've done good work here, and you have, one of the things I would like to hear about as we go along is not just, the writing that you've done and the project that you have shown us, but I'm aware, from having worked with you since the time you arrived, I'm aware of what seems to me a powerful, dramatic arc that your sort of writership, or whatever you want to call it, has undergone in the time that you have been here, that you've had considerable change and growth. And that's something that, frankly, not every or even most MFAs actually experience. They're still, as they leave, they're still working on the incomplete novel that they brought in with them. In the same way that they brought it in. And so when we have a student who goes through a real, a powerful arc, I like to hear about it because, it's a story, right? Like, your time here has been a story, it seems to me. And I'm interested in that story, in something like the same way I'm interested in your manuscript. So will you take it over? You can do your disquisition, show us anything you want to show us, and then we'll ask you a few questions.
Okay, yeah, I do have a disquisition. First off, thanks to everybody for coming in real life. I like doing things in real life. Everybody here has given me support. You guys have stepped up. You've been nimble in responding to the chaotic events of life. One of my complaints about novels is a lot of them don't seem to reflect the chaos of actual life. I think we all know what it is, and I appreciate your helping me navigate it very much. It was your support, really, also everybody in this room, that kind of allowed me to get through this. I do think I've grown a lot creatively. As you know, in the MFA program here, we do a lot of different things. We use a lot of different media. We do proto-podcast episodes, and we do fan wikis, and we do book trailers, and we do comics. And we also write text. And this project is something that has been born here in this program. I hadn't written a single scene before this program. I've been interested in this for a long time, and I'm going to talk about that. But it's a new project. First off, since this thesis is just like the first 100+ pages of the novel, the first thing I was going to do was kind of give you an idea of my plan for the novel's overall shape. The main action is supposed to involve roughly the first 1.5 expeditions by LaSalle. The end of the thesis sort of takes the reader up to the beginning of the first one. He planned to go down the Ohio. I'll just say for now, the trip went seriously awry. I want to take the reader then to his second expedition that he's known for, which is going from Quebec down to the Gulf of Mexico, which didn't happen until 1682. So just to step back and put some context on what's out there on LaSalle, and how I ended up writing about these particular characters. So mostly what's been written about LaSalle, and there's a lot, seems to involve what he discovered. And who discovered things has never really interested me all that much. So for a long time, LaSalle wasn't even going to be part of this project. What I've been interested in for a long time is the earliest French and American, the indigenous American interactions, especially in Illinois in the 17th century, and just the cultural interface of that. And Illinois, by the way, is an exonym. It's a word used by the French to apply to a confederacy of groups that lived in this area. So the whole project is a work in progress. But anyway, these groups spoke languages that were part of the Algonquian group of languages, as did the Canadian allies back in Canada of the French. And the historian Richard White has described these groups' cultural interface as a sort of middle ground, and he describes it this way. Because the French and Algonquians were trading partners and allies, the boundaries of the Algonquian and French worlds melted at the edges and merged. Although identifiable Frenchmen and identifiable Indians obviously continued to exist, whether a particular practice or way of doing things was French or Indian was, after a time, not so clear. This was not because individual Indians became Frenchified or because individual Frenchmen went native. Rather, it was because Algonquians, perfectly comfortable with their status and practices as Indians, and Frenchmen, confident in the rightness of French ways, nonetheless had to deal with people who shared neither their values nor their assumptions about the appropriate way of accomplishing tasks. They had to arrive at some common conception of suitable ways of acting. They had to create a middle ground. The creation of the middle ground involved a process of mutual invention. So I'm interested in this middle ground and the process of invention. And LaSalle, the discoverer, didn't seem to have much to do with this. But when I started reading first-person accounts, it started seeming to me that for his contemporaries, what he discovered was really the last thing on their minds. I think he was relevant to them because he was squarely in that middle ground. He was trying to influence the Illinois. He was trying to influence the Iroquois. He was trying to influence the French. And he was stirring, vigorously stirring, a boiling pot. He had an extraordinary amount of energy, which was often kind of really ill-directed, and it was a catalyst of a lot of underlying struggles. And the way this very flawed man kind of walked a tightrope between groups who were deadly at odds with each other for decades, always angering the French, always angering his own men, is just kind of interesting. And the story of the expeditions is really a story of multiple disasters, to the point where his persistence really seems to me almost to rise to the level of insanity, and that is interesting. So anyway, it's these controversies and tensions which at a novelistic level are about just life stories of a few people that interested me. So anyway, the culmination of the book isn't planned to be LaSalle getting to the mouth of the Mississippi. I'm planning to take him as far as Illinois, which was where a lot of crises occurred. So anyway, there's a lot to talk about in terms of like how you structure a novel, interiority versus action, history versus fiction, chronology versus flashbacks, and how to put it together. And I'd love to talk about that. If you have the patience and you want to listen to me talk, I do have some other stuff that I can say. Raph had us write an essay as the culminating project of our novel class, and which took place last spring. And this, we were told to write about our writerly formation, about matters like our life experiences that shaped our creative preoccupations. So I don't like writing about myself very much, and I resisted this the assignment. But after the fact, the essay did begin to seem like the sort of thing that might interest me if someone else had written it. You know, I'm always reading articles on why writers write what they write. And writing fiction, from a practical point of view, it's just a very strange thing to do. I mean, it's a recipe for difficult toil, a lot of rejection, and no money. So the compulsion, you know, is kind of interesting. And you guys are writers, and you study literature, and you know, you're friends of mine. So I can share with you, not the whole essay because it's too long, but the pieces that have to do with this thesis, if you're interested. Shall I go
Please,
ahead and
yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, well.
You're a very compelling speaker, by the way. So you know. No, I mean, I would listen to you talk about pretty much anything.
Oh, that's good.
So-
Thank you.
We're enjoying it. We're enjoying it.
But this in particular,
Good.
I'm interested in because you have good stories.
Thank you. Well, you guys have some life experience, and you know how things layer on things. And it's interesting. Anyway, so this mentions people in my family, people I know. All the names have been changed. By the way, anyone who's written memoir or practiced law or anything like that can tell you how elusive the facts are. So if you've lived long enough, some of the stuff that happened 25 or 30 or 50 years ago can start seeming really pretty strange. So let's just say I'm going to tell you a story. Late spring, 2022, Carbondale. Val called. What joy. A long, juicy, newsy phone call from my 24-year-old daughter. She fills me in on her new job. Glenn and I raised Val in Pasadena, California, near the Japanese and black neighborhood where Glenn, a third-generation Japanese American, grew up in the 50s and 60s. However, Val, a mechanical engineer, has been drawn to Austin, Texas by a much-coveted job. She works with a mix of white men, Asian American men, and men from China, India, Colombia, and South Korea. Sometimes she and I talk about being the only woman in the room, something I too experienced as a corporate lawyer in the 80s and 90s. But today she's talking about something else, something I haven't experienced. She tells me, it's interesting watching these guys try to figure out what I am. It's like, is she Asian? Wait, she's Asian, but she's not. September 2001, Pasadena, California. I'm 39 and 7 months pregnant with twins, lying in bed in the middle of the afternoon. Val, not quite 3, is playing on the bed, periodically feeling my tummy to assess the twins' movements. 3-year-olds tend to ask a lot of questions, and now Val asks me one, quite a complicated one that I'm destined to remember, word, for decades. What color are you? What color is Dad? And what color am I? That's a lot for a single sentence. I'm not ready. I don't have much parenting experience. I've only just barely started to realize that for a not quite 3-year-old, race is already a big deal. Val had recently, with a look of concern, reported to me what a girl at the playground had told her. Your mommy is a white girl. What do you say to that? I tell Val I'm seen as white because my ancestors come from Europe, and Dad's called Asian because his ancestors come from Japan. At 2, she couldn't really conceive what Europe was, or Japan. That didn't much bother me. It was and is a matter of faith with me that kids readily take in stuff they don't remotely understand, and then gradually over time assemble from the bits and pieces knowledge. What I couldn't seem to say in so many words was just what she was. I remember thinking about something I'd read, about a black father answering this question for his biracial daughter by blending chocolate and vanilla ice cream in a bowl. The ice cream thing, I remember thinking, worked better if your husband was black than if he was Asian. March 2024, Carbondale. I'm supposed to write an essay on my writerly formation and the themes of my work. I've been flipping through my journal, and somehow my 2022 phone call with Val and the whole matter of what my kids are seems relevant, even to my current project, a historical novel set in the 17th century in what would later be Illinois. Now, a mere 22 or 23 years after Gwen first asked what color each of us was, multiracial is a box that you can check. And yet the questions haven't stopped. How do your kids identify? Someone will ask me. And I still don't know the answer. I feel uncomfortable asking. No. Hi, everybody. Hi. I'm just reading some stuff from my my themes essay for Raph's class. Hi. I feel uncomfortable asking, or if I'm being honest, maybe I don't want my kids to have to define, to God forbid, place a border around just what and who they are. Is this just white girl bullshit? Hey, it's not like race isn't real. It's not like color doesn't matter. If I hadn't known those things before, I would have known them on Belle's second day of kindergarten, when just after dropping her off, before I'm even off the playground, I overhear some kid say to her, "I'm not going to play with you because you're brown." I would have known it when the high school guidance counselor tells my twins not to bother applying to certain colleges because they have too many Asians. I would have known it when the front desk clerk at an Arizona hotel simply would not let me check in. There was something fishy about the Japanese last name on my driver's license. I would have known it when my mother-in-law stood in my kitchen, pointed her long skinny finger at my twins, and declared they could not possibly be Glenn's children because they looked too white. Houston, July 2024. The twins' Asian friends tell them they look white. They tell them they're white passing. The twins don't complain, yet I sense this bothers them. I haven't asked them, of course, but I get the strong impression, I don't think it's out of line for me to say, they don't feel white. Justine, one of the twins, has started baking with mochi flour and eating giant clam and octopus and every food that's seen as out there by your average white American. Is she making a statement? Race matters, and my kids know it to their bones, yet I'd hate for them to see me making a federal case out of it, as my mom would have said. My in-laws were sent to the Japanese internment camps. I wasn't. My husband, born in 1954, had that three-letter epithet hurled at him every day. I didn't. I may be a legal Matsumura for 26 years, ever since, while standing in line at the DMV, standing there 6 months pregnant to renew my driver's license, I decided on the spot, on the merest impulse, that I wanted to have the same name as my daughter. But of course, I'm white. My kids don't know the half of it. For their whole lives, I've known my udon from my soba. And yet, before that, I was a 60s era downstate Illinois kid, being scolded, "Don't say git, say get." I was a brand new young solo Californian, circa 1980, mispronouncing Spanish place names, calling Asians Orientals, and terrified of my dinner sporting eyeballs and antenna at my first sushi bar. July 2015, Boston. Glenn and I decide that for the sake of our kids' education, we should take them to see the East Coast. Well, in Boston, we pass the public library, and I divert us into an exhibit of Revolutionary War era maps. I've never been much interested in the Revolutionary War, but some of these maps include the area that's now Illinois. Illinois was somehow in the Revolutionary theater of war? I do not recall learning that in school. School history-wise, Illinois seemed to have existed solely to launch Lincoln. I study the 1700s era, indigenous-sounding, recognizable place names. Emaquan, the Mississippi. In place of my hometown, Peoria, is La Paix. That night I start Googling. I'm still not interested in the Revolution, but what went on in central Illinois, including way back in the day, does interest me a lot, especially after 35 years of living on the coast. When I was 18, Dad sent me to college in California. At the time, this decision seemed strange. We felt ourselves to be Midwesterners. Dad raised us in his hometown. And Dad, as I see in retrospect, in the fullness of adulthood, did not give this decision very much thought. It would be cool, he figured, for me to go to California. It would be up and coming. And so I went to California, a place that in 1980 seemed to me so different from the south end of Peoria that I called it Planet Zorg. In retrospect, it's interesting that of my first Zorgian friends, the first Californians who took me under their wing, none of them were my co-ethnicists. All of them were Asian Americans. In any case, after being sent to California, I roamed the country, being up and coming. You might say I was ambitious, or that I liked to try new things. You might say I was an eccentric person who had no niche in 1980s Peoria. You might say I'm just a restless person. In any case, I never returned to Illinois. I went to law school in Boston. I summered in DC for internships. I spent time in London, and I joined a New York-based firm. By my mid-30s, I had settled down and had married, in several senses, Los Angeles. But while my heart was in LA, my soul remained Midwestern. And Central Illinois had by now, decades after what turned out to be my permanent departure, a profound romance to it. I miss the picturesque desuetude of Peoria's West Bluff, the shadowy crannies of the Illinois River. I miss the summer thunderstorms, the cornfields, and of course the seasons. I miss my people. I visit sometimes, but it's not, of course, the same. Too much time has passed, and so many of my people. They've left us, and they've left me. For a few days, I'll wander these old streets, sensing, or trying to sense, their elusive presence. Even Kathy, that strange little girl, seems by now mostly a ghost, someone glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, down in the woods, where she used to like to play, all by her little lonesome. What could she have been thinking? Los Angeles, 1993. Jerry, a New Yorker I work with, likes to ask me, how are things in Peoria? He says it in this drawn-out, mocking way. It's irritating, but I don't say anything. I know the coastals look down on us. While the Midwest is seen in these pre-Trump times as merely quaint, my hometown of Peoria is in a whole nother league. It was positively risible. We, and I'm not now speaking of Illinoisans, but of my peers, my cohort, we were boomers. Nixon, a Californian, among his other crimes, revived the vaudeville phrase, will it play in Peoria? When I came of age, Peoria was a metonym for average, for middlebrow, for rube. After spending much time in my company, Glenn, who was a dyed-in-the-wool empiricist, mused, when people ask where you're from, and you tell them Peoria, about a third of them actually laugh in your face. Yet I can't really say I had a chip. The Jerrys didn't threaten me. They thought they were sophisticated, but I knew they were the opposite, people of narrow experience. Also, maybe Illinoisans were us, but I was also partly them, an LA person, and I knew that chauvinism goes both ways. It goes a lot of ways. Which side am I on? Both, I guess, or neither. Half the time I don't know quite who I, quote, unquote, am. What I don't like is to be put into a demographic box. When someone attributes some quality to me, or in fact to anyone, based on geographic origin, or gender, or race, or age, what I think of as demographic limitations I've had to work around throughout my life, I tend to think it's not that simple. Peoria, Illinois, 1973. I, age 11. This is my phone. It's my aunt. Helen, I'm in my thesis defense. I'll make it later. Thank you. Bye-bye. I don't know if that was appropriate, but it is my aunt. She's pretty old. Anyway.
Family comes first.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They do.
You
I know why
handled it-
she's calling.
You handled it so gracefully.
Yeah.
So.
I sent her a box of See's candies, which I do every Christmas. She's probably calling to thank me. Make sure I've hung up here. Okay, back to 1973. I, age 11, learn that it's Peoria's tricentennial. Apparently in 1673, a French Jesuit, Père Marquette, and fur trader Louis Joliet came through my hometown. I'm bookish, a nerd kid. This factoid interests me greatly. We, Peoria, are important. We have history. I would like to know the names of some Illinois Indians, or really anything about them. Such information seems difficult to get. I have a set of 6 kids' books, each one about a different Indian tribe. The Sioux out in the Great Plains with their teepees and buffalo and Sundance, the Seminole in the Everglades, those in the Northwest with totem poles, Pueblo-dwelling Hopi, woodland Indians in longhouses. What about the Illinoisans, I wonder? Were they a subset of one of these groups? I mull this over quite a lot. Somehow I don't think so. And if not, why were they left out? The info in these books is scanty. I read them over and over, studying them like actual artifacts, apparently hoping that if I read them an additional time, more information somehow will come out. It never does. The tricentennial is a disappointment. I hope to be taken to events, shown artifacts, but there's nothing. Nothing about the Indians nor the Frenchmen. I'm not sure what to picture when I picture 17th century Frenchmen. There's nothing in the Wayback Machine segment of the Rocky and Bullwinkle show. I guess I could walk to Bradley University, a mere half-mile from my house, and ask a college librarian for research assistance. Given that I'm 11, this might irritate them greatly. My ignorance continues, my frustration increases. Nearby is a town called Creve Coeur. In all my years, neither I, nor to my knowledge anyone, has ever given Creve Coeur a second thought. But when I learned during high school French that Creve Coeur means heartbreak, I feel a real frisson. Stuff happened here, I think. It must have. But what? If only we had ruins like they had in Europe. All Creve Coeur has now is car dealerships. In the next couple years, though, my interest in local history cools. Information remains trapped in college library stacks, secured from children's prying eyes. Also, I realize, based on the few scanty, mysterious tidbits that your average kid in those pre-Google days was able to obtain, that when it came to Indians and Europeans, things were much more complicated and much worse than I realized. My mom reads Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. She lets drop about Europeans giving smallpox-infected blankets to Indians. Then there's the Marlon Brando Sachin Littlefeather thing, and I don't really understand it, but I know it has to do with the Indians getting screwed. A mysterious event incubates in my mind, awaiting context and meaning. In an early 1970s family vacation to California, we go, as tourists do, to see a mission. The one in San Diego, one with, if memory serves, a statue of a certain Father Junipero Serra. A massive, angry crowd is there. I've never seen such a thing. We turn around and leave. My parents, who never explain too much of anything, don't explain this either. They may not be fully clued in themselves. Boston, 2015. I'm just as interested in 17th century Illinois as I was in 1973, but now I'm equipped with Google. Glenn and the kids fall asleep in our hotel room, but I stay up for hours. There are records, there are first-hand accounts of the doings of Illinois Indians, of intermarriage among Indians and Europeans, of mixed-race kids, of certain specific mixed-race kids' complex identities, 100 years before the American Revolution in central Illinois. I've never heard of Martin Chartier before, but now he interests me. He worked for LaSalle and traveled with him out to Illinois and helped build a doomed fort that LaSalle, who was feeling really down and out, called, wait for it, Creve Coeur. Chartier married a woman he met in Illinois, one Sawatha Straight-Tail. They had kids. Their son Peter became a Shawnee chief. Why have I never heard of them? And what of Canaquis? He was an important Mohawk leader, famous for his eloquent speeches to the French. He was also Jan Schmidt, son of a Dutchman. And LaSalle seems not quite the generic Frenchman I thought. Some French claim he's clueless because he spent his whole adult life among the sauvages. Certainly he's highly reliant on key indigenous men, whom he brings to France and back and employs as his bodyguards. People like Martin, Sawatha, Canaquis, and LaSalle walked strange ground, surrounded by new people, struggled with strange words, ate food wrong, and lacked the proper manners. They married people who looked different and had kids who mystified them. I can't help but feel a certain affinity. More than that, they feel, to me, present. The dead are invisible. They're not absent. So says historical novelist Hilary Mantel, quoting St. Augustine. I feel that, as the kids might say. Carbondale, April 2024. While preparing for fiction workshop, which concerns Jordan Peele's movie, Get Out, I run across a 2017 Harper's essay by Zadie Smith, Getting In and Out, Who Owns Black Pain? She illuminates for me one reason I'm so drawn to stories of the 17th century Illinois. It's the reversal of perspective, of the prevailing mythology, a technique that's also important to get out. She writes, "There are those who think of Frostian woods as the pastoral, as America the beautiful, and others who think summer in the city as likewise beautiful in American. One of the marvelous tricks of Get Out is to reverse these constituencies, revealing two separate planets of American fear, separate but not equal. One side can claim a long, distinguished cinematic history. Why should I fear the black man in the city? The second, though not entirely unknown, Deliverance, the Wicker Man, is certainly more obscure. Why should I fear the white man in the woods? Get Out is structured around inversions and reversals. Which mythology, or more precisely, whose? Instead of the familiar, terrified white man robbed at gunpoint by a black man on a city street, we meet a black man walking in the leafy white suburbs, stalked by a white man in a slow-moving vehicle. Get Out flips the script. The French and Indians of Illinois often seem to flip the script. A French sailor passes through a hamlet in downstate Illinois. In a letter home, he casually mentions that there are already 3 flour mills in the town, one owned by a Frenchman and 2 by Indians. This surprises me. It's not in the script. She covered me with a capo, says one Frenchman of his Indian wife. It's his way of saying that she saved him from dying of exposure, and it's not in the script. Father Gravier relates that Illinois Chief Rouenza wished to have for a son-in-law Michel Acot, a French trader and translator who traveled with LaSalle. This seems off script. Is it possible that Rouenza saw himself, was seen by Gravier as a man with agency, a leader making war and trade alliances through marriage? His daughter, 17-year-old Marie, also seems to have wandered off script. She rejected Acot because she wanted to devote her life to Christ, but then agreed to marry him when he resolved to forego his libertine ways. She outlived him, married a second Frenchman, raised a large Métis family, and died a wealthy woman, owning 5 slaves and a vast estate. She disowned one son for leaving a French settlement to live with her parents' people. Inside the back cover of my planner, I copy some words from an essay by A.S. Byatt describing the work of Penelope Fitzgerald, a historical novelist. Like the surrealist, Fitzgerald asserts the reality of the invisible, the improbable, the singleton. The individual is individualized by one single chance event alone, that is, his birth. Chance makes farce, and chance makes disaster. In between these, we construct our identities as best we may. The invisible, the improbable, the singleton. 3 of my favorite things. Carbondale, July 2023. How I wish I had the talent and zest, it seems, for passing judgment of a Zadie Smith. Her well-received historical novel, The Fraud, has just come out, apparently, along with her essay on why she wrote it, a hard copy of which is in my hands just now in the New Yorker, to which I subscribe, being coastal elitish. The Fraud involves a 19th century criminal trial in Smith's hometown of London, a trial in which the star witness was a black man who'd grown up enslaved in Jamaica, the home of some of Smith's forebears. For years, Smith tells us, she maintained a prejudice against historical fiction as aesthetically and politically conservative before realizing you can come at the past from an interrogative angle or a sly remove, and some historical fiction will radically transform your perspective, not just on the past, but on the present. That the scales fell from her eyes was convenient since, as she tells us, I stumbled upon a story from the 19th century that I knew at once, had my name all over it, a story perfect for my purposes. Ah, to have a story with one's name all over it, to have a story perfect for one's purposes, to have purposes. Sadly, my project does not so much have my name all over it as reside outside my lane. Things have changed since 1973, things other than having Google. We've realized that if you're white, you may have no business writing about people who aren't. This is causing me a lot of worry. My writing from a JA point of view was bad enough, but now I want to write about Native Americans. Who do I think I am? For some reason, my grandpa, who died when I was quite young, comes to mind. He was born in 1891. He was an adventurous guy, a bit of a stunt rider who roamed the near wilderness of the upper Midwest and lower Canada, and then settled down in northern Minnesota to homestead with a 17-year-old girl who became my grandma. Indians lived near them, but not with. Grandma claimed it was some Indians living in their former cabin that burned it down. Somehow I have a sense of what Grandpa Harry would have said, not about the Indians, but about me, about my strange little compulsions, about my pushing it, about my writing, first about Japanese Americans, and now Indians, about my jumping farther, ever farther from my lane. He liked to use a certain expression. It's that expression, one Mom also liked to use, that now comes to mind. If you're going to risk getting hanged, you might as well be hanged for a sheep as for a lamb. Thank you. Well,
Are you ready for us to ask some questions? 'Cause that's a great way to start.
thank you.
That's
Thank you.
terrific.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Well, I'm kind of glad now that Ralph forced me to go through this whole process of probing my motivations, as much as I complained about it at the time.
Well, one wishes that students had a better sense of that, yes, that sometimes we're not just sadists.
Yeah, this is for your own good.
Right.
So there's a lot of issues, as you can see. It can be a fraught process, you know.
Well, you and I have had a lot of time to talk, and to talk in particular about this, section of a manuscript. So I have many things I could ask, and ChatGPT at my lunch gave me a bunch of questions that I could and should ask.
Oh my
It's
God.
actually very, very good. I'll send you the questions.
Yeah.
It gave me, because they're excellent questions.
Yeah. No,
And
they're
I
interesting.
sort of, when I've enjoyed a book, I generally have very few questions except like, is there a sequel?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I don't, I'm not, I don't have all that much interest in process, to be honest. But so I will defer to you all. I'd love to hear what you all think and what questions you have and that kind
Yeah,
of.
and I mean, and I know I've kind of thrown like a very niche time period at you guys. I know you guys, scholarship is in the period, but it's not in French Illinois or French Canada for that matter, and it is kind of niche, but I mean, it does have some resonance with other literature and the usage of historical people, and I know George has done some reading in this area of, how did the indigenous societies influence the Europeans, which is also something that interests me a lot. So yeah, and if anybody just has any questions about how you decide what to put in and leave out, I mean, that's what I'm struggling with every day, how to put it together.
Well, I do. I have a question that's, I don't know, it may not be the greatest question, but I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Just this is going to sound weird, but why did you start at the chronological beginning? It seemed to me that you were really kind of moved and excited about some of the things further down the road. That's kind of where you came into it.
Yeah.
So I was just, I mean, I don't
Well-
have a problem with it, but it's just an interesting.
No, it's a good question, because I actually didn't at first. I actually, like a year ago, I was actually writing, I thought I'm starting I actually had a very specific time. I was going to start in December of 1679, so that's 12 years after where I actually started. And I actually started writing scenes, I wanted to be in medias res in the middle of the expedition. And I started writing these scenes, and then I just thought, it's not really the expedition that I'm interested in, and it's not even really the action that I'm interested in. It's the people. And there were just too many things, the way they act and the stuff they do, just some crazy stuff happened. And in order to understand that, I felt like I had to go back. So for example, down the line, when LaSalle is out kind of in the middle of a very sparsely populated area, Lake Superior, he needs money. He needs to raise money. And what his brother does back in Canada is his brother just sells all his assets and goes to France. He just really kind of screws him over. And it's kind of mind-boggling when you come across this in the historical record. You're like, what? Wait, Jean, he sold everything? He left? I mean, they were literally, getting rid of all of his stuff. And then you start to think, why did this happen? And so then you just start trying to think it through. And, similarly, when they're out there in Illinois, and again, I don't know how to pronounce these names. I'm trying to work with this, and I'm planning a trip out, to go through some of these areas and to meet with people. But there's a later time when one of the characters, Takano, runs across one of LaSalle's right-hand men, and he's like, we've got to burn this guy. We've got to burn this guy. And somebody talked him out of it. But you kind of wonder, what's the history here? That he knows that since this is LaSalle's right-hand man, we've got to burn this guy. And the other guy's like, no, we shouldn't burn him, And you kind of want to go back and try to think about, why did this happen? So that's like the $64,000 question to me of when to start this thing. Because I've had three separate things. First, I was going to start at that point in Illinois. And then I thought, no, I've really got to start in 1672 because of some other stuff. And then finally I'm like, no, I'm just going to put it back to when he came to France. So,
Yeah.
I have scenes I wrote, Brock has read some of these, I have scenes I wrote when he was 4 years old, because I'm trying to flesh out the psychology of some of the weird stuff that these people do.
That's really interesting. So it's for you to develop a kind of intimacy with the psychological, makeup, and you want to kind of do the experiences somewhat in chronological order, so that you're not writing a version of him that at the end that you come to disagree with or something.
Yeah, and just to kind of make it seem I don't know, seem like it's a believable person.
Mm-hmm.
There's the question of using flashbacks, for example, but it's hard to do that sometimes without confusing the reader. People, if you study fiction, people are you use a lot of flashbacks. People are like, don't do that, and so I read a book this summer that was, or maybe it was last year. It was The Master by Colm Tabine about Henry James, and the way that he handles things, it's really interesting because he has massive amounts of stuff that would seem like flashback, but it's worked very skillfully into the interiority of Henry James. And I thought about that, so for example, certain scenes, like there's that scene toward the beginning where LaSalle is kind of starting to get worried about Adiron being an Iroquois, and he sort of flashes back to when he was a kid and they told all those gruesome stories. So I was kind of trying to do that. I was trying to use flashback in his interiority. But I feel like you can't, I'm not as good as Colm Tabine, and I can't go on for pages and pages, or people are just going to be like, where are you now?
Well, also for when you're writing about James, it's fair.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And it kind of makes sense. But I think I think you're probably right that it might get disorienting. Partly because I love the language that you're using and the way you're kind of evoking these characters and the time, and it can be kind of challenging language, for readers.
Yeah.
And so I think layering in too much complexity.
Yeah.
Along with our presenting this kind of complex, confusing foreign mindset in the past.
Yes.
The past is a foreign country kind of thing.
Yeah.
You don't want to make it overly complicated.
Yeah, there's only so
there.
much, there's only so much. And I'm not, there's so few people that read this kind of book. But, they say you want to read the book, you want to write the book that you want to read. People say that, and I feel that way, so I have certain books that I really admire that I've talked about with some of you guys, like The Blue Flower by Penelope Fitzgerald and Golden Hill by Frances Spufford, and they just let it rip. And I'm like, that's what I'm aspiring to, because those are the books I want to read, because especially when you get to be like my age, you've read so many books, and it's easy to open a book and be like, I've read this before, and I don't want to do that, so so that's
Well,
what
you
I'm
haven't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And that's, it's a virtue for folks like us.
Yeah.
The difficulty is for marketing people, that's not a virtue.
Yeah.
For them to see a book they haven't read before is a terrifying experience, as far as I can tell.
Yes, I agree.
So it's,
Yeah.
but no. This is, I guess I've read what, all the common things, you know, that, you know, I mean, I've read James Fenimore Cooper, right? I've read, you know,
Yeah.
Last of the Mohicans.
Yes.
And I've read
yeah.
Black Robe.
Yeah.
Yeah, he and I actually had the same publisher back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so Black Robe was a big deal when it came out.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. That actually, I guess, well, it was a different reading landscape then. But yeah, I mean, he got it published, you know, it was a good book.
Oh, that's good.
And
It's
they made it
such
into a movie.
Yeah,
The
it's
ultimate
good. It's a
sign
good
of
film, too.
success, you know.
yeah, it's a good film too.
Yeah.
And you know, but this is not those, right? I mean, you said you're interested in the people, not the action, and you know, those are both, you know, sort of, well, I wouldn't say action oriented, but plot oriented.
Yeah.
In a way that this is not. But this reminded me more of like Werner Herzog's.
Fitzcarraldo?
No, not
Yeah.
well, Fitzcarraldo. Yes, but
Yeah.
thank you.
What?
Aguirre, Wrath of
Oh
God.
yeah, I haven't seen that. I have to see
you should
that.
see it.
Yeah.
You've got a great
Yeah.
treat
Yeah.
ahead of you.
It's
because when you
definitely
say
dealing with some of these issues.
yeah, when you say, oh, things went really bad on
Yeah.
the expedition,
Yeah.
and it really got crazy, that's Aguirre, Wrath of God. And,
Yeah.
and it's because, in part, because the production was so insane.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because they were living in the same conditions that the Spaniards were, right? And,
Yeah.
and anyway, so you know, that's much closer, I think, than the obvious analogs, the obvious comps.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, you also understand. I mean, you seem to. I mean, you're hopelessly old-fashioned.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, like, I mean, I love that because I love hopelessness, and I'm old. So, but yeah, I mean, you remind me so much of a Joyce Carol Oates, say, or someone like that. You know, who
I'll take it.
You know, like you'd have been a phenomenal success in the '80s. You know, which again, to me, that's not. You know, I admire the hell out of that.
Yeah.
I was a success in the '80s, and boy, that's a long time ago now.
Yeah.
So I you know, again, I'll defer, but I'd like to hear you speculate a little bit about the future of this novel and completing it for first of all, because I want to read the rest of it. But second of all, like, what life do you think it has outside of a place where you can call on these great intellectuals, right, who are willing to encompass your eccentricity in a world that hates eccentricity and that hates you.
Yeah.
And, right. Like, what do what do you do in that world? I'm not asking you to answer that now.
Yeah.
I want to. But if we have time to get to that, because I feel confident you have thoughts about the impossibility of the success of this book.
Yeah. No, I thought about it. I think about, like, my kind of role models, people like Hilary Mantel, and I mean, her first novel, A Place of Greater Safety, was like a 800-page novel about the French Revolution, which, you know, I read it after I read Wolf Hall, and I was like, wow, I like Hilary Mantel, and I loved it. I loved A Place of Greater Safety. I mean, and it was so long that it was like my routine at night. I would look forward to getting back to this book. Well, of course, this was her first novel, but she couldn't publish it. Like, imagine writing an 800-page novel and not being able to publish it. And then she wrote other stuff. She wrote like a modern novel, a short modern novel, got that published. And then much later, probably after Wolf Hall, she finally got this thing published. And I've thought, I don't know that I'll ever publish anything. I mean, look, I've come to this late in my life. I've wanted to make money and go back to practicing law, and maybe I will. But I've thought that the only possible path to getting this published, if that were to happen, would be to write something else first that was more accessible. And I do actually have another project which is set in the current day. It's comic. It's a comic piece. I think, I don't know if Toby's around here. He may have read part of it in Raph's workshop. And I think it actually maybe is something that could be sold. But if like I could finish that and get it sold, if it was good enough that someone was actually interested in my work, that would probably be the only way. Or alternatively, if I somehow like did some sort of small publisher among like people who were interested in this area. Like, I've read about 1 million books among this sort of subgroup, and sometimes they find a way to publish. And then another thing I think people really need to do is they need to find like a British publisher, because they publish different stuff, in my opinion. I have a friend who, she just could not get her book published. And it is a challenging read. It's really a Western, but the name of it, I think maybe was a challenge, and just couldn't get it published. Well, she got it published by a small British publisher, and then it was reviewed in The Guardian, and then it was reviewed in the Wall Street Journal, you know, and
Yeah.
no problem
Yeah,
after
I mean,
that.
Bloomsbury, you know, I can see
Yeah.
Bloomsbury being interested in a book like this, but also, I mean, I've told you, I am, you know, I'm going to be, and Mandy has left, but I'm going to be running a fiction series for SIU Press,
Yeah.
and that's you know, there she is. We're talking. I was just talking about the fiction series,
Oh, yeah.
and as a place where a book like this might find a home, right, because of the Illinois material. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you know, and that connection,
Yeah.
and that's what SIU Press has to do. But I want you to understand that it's impossible to publish it elsewhere, so you'll let me publish it.
Oh, you know, hey, I'm down with that.
Okay.
I love SIU Press. I mean, I have so many of SIU Press's books because they have published a lot of the path-breaking history on this subject.
Well, right,
you know?
and this is right in there.
Yeah.
But it's not a business proposition.
Yeah.
It's a
No,
it's a
we would
it's a
never.
passion project, even for the people who work there. So,
We should talk about that later.
Yeah, I'm up for that, yeah.
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 Well, can I
Yeah.
ask something?
Yeah.
When we talked a few weeks ago, I said, having read 50 pages, that although this was so heavily researched, it really moved right along, which I think is fantastic. You have a light touch with all of this learnedness. And one of your ways seems to be to rely a great deal on expository dialogue and minor character interlocutors, and to show entangling alliances, colonial absurdities, personal quirks, and most especially wiliness through these dialogues. So hats off. It can't be easy to do. One of the things I feel moved to ask you about is my favorite character, who remains, Aderon.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, and I wondered, you know, you've got chapter 3 introducing him, and that's really interesting, and then chapters 6 and 7 are kind of an extended interlude with him and his frenemy,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Otreuati.
Yeah.
And, you know, he comes in and out, and of course, being a polyglot and a kind of rover of borders, I guess, he's interesting. But I really enjoyed his. It seemed as if both with him and Robert that you allowed yourself more free and direct discourse, more dwelling on the experience of uncertainty, of internal debate, of not knowing quite what to do next or say next. There's this, I wondered if you could just talk more about that foil relationship and or what I sense to be Aderon's sort of drift from his own family group. Did I miss something? Was there meant to be something kind of dark about that? Did he betray someone? Was he betrayed or abandoned?
So, yeah, I'm still working through that, but, well, I'm glad you like this character, because this
Yeah.
really is the first character I started with.
Oh.
I had this character before, or this character was in mind, and like I had started kind of compiling stuff about this character before I decided to work with LaSalle, actually.
Uh-huh.
So I'm glad you like him. Wait, what was now I've lost the thread of the question.
The thread of the question was sort of your choice. I mean, did you mean for
Oh, yeah, like his dark background and stuff.
alienation
Yeah,
and stuff
yeah.
to parallel Robert's.
Yeah, no, that's right, okay.
And then I just wanted more information about it
Yeah,
too.
yeah. No, I'm still working on it, but,
Uh-huh.
so the way that I started, so I wanted a character who was from the Illinois area. And so, one of the things that seems pretty apparent from those times was the Iroquois were, and I'm using these exonyms, because they're more commonly known, but this is not the way it's working in the manuscript, as you know. I'm trying to use more words that they would have used. But in any case, I wanted a character from the Illinois area. And it was known that the Iroquois were coming out as far as Illinois and waging war and taking captives and bringing people back. And that, they were partially repeopling their nation with captives, with children, and sometimes with women. And so he's actually meant to be a character who originally was taken when he was a small boy in Illinois and has not that many memories of it. He was small, it was probably really traumatic. And then he was adopted by these
Okay,
they're
I
called
missed that, I'm
Mohawk.
sorry.
No,
Yeah.
that's okay. It's not necessarily that clear, because it's not that clear to him yet.
Okay,
And that's something that's kind of unfolding, and why does he know how to speak French? It's difficult for him to remember exactly why he learned this. And so, so he had another family, and now he's got this new family. And, this is what happened. And I've been lucky enough to run across a couple accounts of people being adopted into the Iroquois tribe and the Iroquois nation, and all the, the regalia and the celebrations and all the stuff that happens, and, so he's part of this, but at the same time, when he finds this gun, it kind of triggers this memory, and he's like, wait a minute,
I'm
and
a
then,
crane.
yeah, with the
Yeah.
crane, and then, he has this bad experience where he's with these people and this kid drowns and it kind of freaks him out, and he's kind of like, and people, the men especially in these groups, they did a lot of moving around, they went to war, they just went to visit relatives, they went on trading missions, and, he just decides he's gonna go off and do this stuff. So, but yeah, he does have this background, and I want him to get back to Illinois, and I'm sort of trying to think through what remains of his family and what's going to happen. This is going to be part of his arc. It is dark, but I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen. So yeah.
So, and is he based on a historical
No,
personage?
actually,
Okay.
he's the one main character actually who's totally
Okay.
fiction.
Okay.
Yeah. And for a lot of the others, and this is hard for me because different historical novelists take different approaches. Some people just make up everything. Or it's like alt history, kind of like Bridgerton or whatever. And then others, like Hilary Mantel, I feel like she's really, really trying to stick to the record. And I would like to stick to the record because what interests me is like the weirdness of it.
Yeah.
Like, why did they do these weird things?
Right.
But there's so little.
Mhm.
So then you're like, my God, what could possibly have happened? And so, yeah, you find yourself just trying to figure this out. So anyway, it's very freeing to have a totally fictional character.
Yeah.
It's funny, I read this book, I did an independent study with Pinckney, and I read a bunch of historical novels and sort of tried to analyze what I liked and didn't like. And one of them was this one called The Moor's Account, which was very interesting. It's about this real expedition, the Narvaez expedition, Narvaez, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, of Spaniards that went to Florida in the 1520s. And it was a gigantic expedition that went disastrously wrong, and practically everyone was killed. But
Yeah, it went from 600 to 2.
to 4,
Yeah.
So, and 4 of these guys somehow survived, and they ended up traveling from Florida to Mexico over the course of years, and one of them was a Moorish guy who was a slave. And almost nothing is known about this guy. And so she wrote from his point of view. And I think it was very freeing, because it's more fun to read about him. She just totally makes up a gigantic backstory. And then she has these real characters, and I know she's getting most of her stuff from an account that one of these guys wrote. But, and the other characters are good too, but the freedom I think she felt with the one was good, because he's fun to read about. So I'm like, how am I going, I want people to be interested in all my characters, so how can I make this happen?
And have you read that diary? Have you read the
Narvaez
diary
thing?
of that expedition?
No, just parts of it, but not the
Oh,
whole
okay.
thing. Yeah.
All right.
yeah.
And there's a really good Spanish film version.
Oh, yeah?
Of that. Of that experience. I mean, that's one of the
Know what
great.
it's called? I'm intrigued.
If you hadn't asked me, George, I'd have been able to tell you. I'm disremembering, but
I'm
it's,
sure it'll like because it's like the Narvez
yeah,
expedition. You
yeah.
could probably
Well,
Google it.
he was the leader of the ship that got lost and destroyed,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's the other guy, Cabeza de Vaca.
Yes, Cabeza de Vaca. Yeah.
That's it, Cabeza de Vaca.
Cowhead.
Head of cow, and and he emerged in what's now California, right after having been having entered the wilderness in Florida.
Yeah.
What's now Florida, and he and years and years and years and fewer men. But it's an amazing survival narrative, a captive narrative in part.
Yeah.
So I didn't know,
Oh,
but
it's
that's
super
but
interesting,
again,
yeah.
it's your what captures you is also what captures me, is like not the like how did we survive in the Andes with no food kind of thing, but like all the weird, very human decisions that get taken, right? Because we always think, well, these people, it's right down to the bone. They're going to be making the most logical, what maximizes my chances of survival.
Calculated.
And they make egotistical, bizarre, fantastical decisions.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's, and it's just wonderful, and it beggars fiction, right?
I was telling Anne, I think the minute I got interested in LaSalle, because again, he's just kind of one of these guys that people might put a statue up of, and that just seems so cut and dry. But I think the minute I got interested, I was reading somebody's first-person account of one of his underlings, and he happened to mention in passing, it was a very, very basic sort of soldier account. He mentioned passing, and of course we were paddling at 11 o'clock at night. And I thought, really? It's December, it's 11 o'clock at night, it's rapids. What the hell?
What a jerk.
And then I start going through this, and there's more of this, and more of this, and more of this. And yeah, and they're people are being instructed to write accounts, and they just get these little digs in. Yeah, and you're like, wow, Speaking of, and I think of Fitzcarraldo, because one of the things he decided to do was to build a sailing ship right above Niagara Falls. And then after he builds it with a great deal of Sturm und Drang, the pilot's like, there's absolutely no way we can get this upstream. It's just not going to happen. And then he just insists they tow it upstream, which they somehow do, and it just goes on from there.
But no, that really is Fitzcarraldo,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
But, I have two totally unrelated questions that have emerged. First, one is, so you're saying like the character is totally fictional, but I'm assuming you're like actually building him out of research about the experiences of, partly the middle ground is helping you, but, other period texts also maybe. And then the other thing is, like, you said where you wanted to end.
Yeah.
And, like, so you don't want to end at the point where he's killed by people who are sick of him. After several incidents where people were trying to kill him because they were sick of him. Why wouldn't you want to get to that culmination of his madness?
When he gets killed? Well, okay, a couple things. First off, I think it would be too long to get to his actual death, because, he was killed sometime after that on a third expedition. I do want to cover several of his assassination attempts, because several of them did occur on this trip. Different kinds of assassination attempts, and I told you, I think, I had this line which I really want to use, which is that one of his underlings think he draws assassination attempts as entrails draw flies, because it really seems to be true. But I don't want to go that far. I just think it's too much. And I also think there is a logical arc. I think, I won't see till I write the last scene, which I have there. Sometimes when I've written stories, I've actually written the last scene more or less first, and I may try to write the last scene so that I can kind of write toward it. But my thinking is, so he went through just, the first expedition is really just about his character development, and about the crazy stuff he did. Because what happens is he goes on this expedition, he sells all of his stuff, he racks up a lot of expenses. They really just don't make any progress at all. Instead, they just have some sort of terrible experiences. And then he just kind of goes missing. Like, there's a gap in the record. It just doesn't say where he is. Now, there might be records in France. This is the kind of thing I worry about. It's like, what's in France? But like, if you read books about him, there's just nothing. There's just like this gap. And during this gap, every now and then he'll pop up in Montreal and sign a contract. During this gap, all this other stuff happens, you know, like Marquette and Joliet get sent on this trip, which must have just caused him to be absolutely insanely mad, you know, but he wasn't around, you know, the intendant couldn't find him. And I'm like, where was he? And I kind of wonder if he was living with some of these indigenous people. I mean, to me, this seems a logical possibility. And I kind of am interested in writing about that. And then when he goes on this next trip, it's just, you know, again, one thing after another. He finally manages to build this boat. Then he sails the boat back with furs to pay off the debts, but the brother takes all of his money and leaves. And then the boat sinks and is never seen again. Even to this day, people every now and then are like, I found the Griffin. You know, this keeps happening. And then he goes down to Illinois and, you know, he builds a fort. And then he realizes, I've got to go back and look for that ship. And when he's gone, his own men burn down the fort and leave. And they write something on it in French. Nous sommes tous sauvages. We are all savages. And they're all gone when he goes back. And then he brings a lawsuit against them in Canada. And it goes on and on. And so he never gets down. This goes on for over a year. And then he doesn't get down to the Gulf. And then finally there's this huge massacre in Illinois. And he's like combing through these dismembered bodies looking for his men. And then at the end of all this, it's like, okay, well, that's it. You know, that's it. But instead, you know, he turns to his guys and he goes, no, we're gonna do it. We're gonna start over. And I think actually that would be kind of a good way to end on, because he does. He starts over, and then the next time he makes it down there. You know, and I mean, it's just kind of an interesting story to me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if that sort of answers some of your thoughts.
No, I mean, it makes sense. I just,
Yeah.
like, his death just seems to be like an expression of part of what you're
Well,
fascinated
maybe
by.
it's an epilogue, yeah?
Well,
Something
so
like
I mean,
that.
Or a second, you know.
Two.
You gotta have material for the
There's a whole-
second
there's a
one.
sequel, yeah.
I might be making it too logical, but I mean, to me, like, there's no explanation that I've run across in the historical record for such matters as why they give a 24-year-old kid with no experience of anything this big piece of land, why he then sells it, why they buy it back. You know, all this stuff has no explanation to me. So as I try to think why it might have happened, a lot of it boils to me down to his ability to sell people on stuff. It's the great American story. I mean, it's like the Wizard of Oz, you know, the Music Man, selling people. And, you know, but not being able to follow through. And, you know, so this kind of fascinates me, and I want to, like, put the seeds of that in there, you know. And I think it's maybe there from the very beginning. But then when he does this trip down to the Gulf, and then he decides he wants to find the actual mouth of the Mississippi from the Gulf. So he's gonna go from France to the Gulf without going through Canada. So that's the third trip. And this, you know, there's all the lead up to that and all the raising of money, which is done, the whole thing, again, it was just an absolute disaster. And they end up getting blown off course or shot off course by the outflow of the Mississippi, possibly, because before the Army Corps of Engineers, it was just crazy down there, you know, when the Mississippi was coming out. And I think that's what happened in Narvaez. They just get literally blown over to Galveston Island. The same thing happened to LaSalle. He ended up getting blown over to Galveston Island. In fact, they just recently found one of his ships down in the shipping channel there. And the University of Texas has done a really wonderful job of excavating it. And so that's like even more
You start
information.
there, and that's how you get, what's his name, the Avatar guy, James Cameron, interested.
Yes.
It's all about recovering the ship,
Yes.
and then you start with the recovery of the ship, and then the whole thing's just a flashback to what actually happened.
Yeah, like at the beginning of Titanic or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, so then he's in Texas for like 2 or 3 years driving everybody crazy. And then he eventually gets shot in Texas by one of his own men, like point blank.
A great place to get shot.
Yeah, to this day.
I think you should claim that that's why you're living in Houston now, that you're working on that part of it.
Well, you know, I will say there are books, you know, it's so interesting. One of the things that interests me is how, like, historical documents kind of get lost and, like, and then they crop up. So, for example, a new firsthand account of this trip just cropped up like 10 years ago in the Texas archives. Someone found it. And they're like, wow, look, we got this thing. And then they published it, and now I have that one, you know?
In what archive?
The Texas archives,
Like state?
like the state
or?
archives.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not at UT.
I don't think so. Yeah. And
I mean, the Ransom Center is a place where you can stumble on previously unknown historical documents.
is that UT?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
their, like, rare books manuscripts library.
Well,
I
don't,
edited
yeah.
a memoir that I found there that I told you about, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I would suggest that this is fascinating, and we could talk to you for hours and hours, but you're going to go hold court at where, Key West or
Buckwater?
somewhere after this, and
Yeah.
then we could, we can sit down with you and buy you beers and tell drunken stories about crazy explorers and weird stuff like that. But I will ask my colleagues: are there determining factors, things that you need to know in order to be able to potentially grant this person the rank of MFA, the exalted rank?
No, but I
of
have an
MFA?
incredibly pedantic question.
Oh my God, George! No,
Yeah, me.
you.
It's like, I don't think you used the name New France ever. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I've thought about that. I've thought about when and how did they use the term New France? Because I'm familiar with it. I know it's cropped up, and the question has come into my mind. What were they using it then? Like, who was using it? And I have to work on that, because I sort of feel like Canada was being used more at the time.
Already in the
Yeah,
17th
already.
century.
So I was tending to use that. But yeah, that is
I
one
guess
of many.
the documents, like the Lahontan stuff that I've read, I think he uses New France a
Yeah,
lot.
he might have.
But that, I mean, I know one text, so
Yeah,
it doesn't,
yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's definitive or anything.
Yeah, no, he might have, and also his stuff came out a little bit later.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm trying to read stuff all in the area because it's so hard to get information. Like, if I want to get information on how a hunt was conducted, I would want to read Lahontan, even though it was later, because it's still going to fill it out. But on the other hand, I also don't want what happened later to influence too much certain things about the thinking of
Right,
my people.
yeah.
So I haven't been in the weeds with Lahontan for quite a while. But for me, more it's like if I can find letters written at that time from some of the like related people, like de Courcelles or like Dallier, that he actually wrote stuff. And what did they use? But yeah, that's one of many issues, because there's a lot of issues here around what did people call stuff,
I mean, I think I got the impression that you're actually paying a great deal of attention to that.
Yeah.
And you're using forms of names that like aren't familiar, but I'm assuming that's because they're the ones that these people were actually using.
Yeah,
Um,
or I'm trying to figure that out. But
Yeah,
yeah.
and I mean, I thought that was great. Like, but I was just
Yeah.
like, that was just the one that I was like, was that being used or not? I'm not actually sure.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I think people did use it, but that is a question in my mind of like, what exactly do I want to call this thing? Same with Montreal. Some people called it Ville Marie, so, and maybe that was just the fort, and some are like Montreal, 2 words. Some are like 1 word, and I've read that orthography in the 17th century was not standardized, so like, people spell their own name, a few different ways.
I can guarantee for you that
Yeah.
that is true.
Yeah.
It was not. It
Yeah.
wasn't until the end of the 18th century that was really even a concept.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I've read George's book on the groom,
Uh-huh.
and I copied down a
Yeah.
lot of stuff because, again, I'm just interested in, like, how did people do stuff back then? What bodily parasites did they carry around? What?
Well, that's a good source.
It is.
He does tell you about that.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I wasn't nearly pedantic enough.
Well, I was like, why do you
I'm
use this
shocked.
one? Use this one word.
Yeah,
instead of
I
some other word?
suppose.
I mean, she
Maybe
made
it's
it,
that the answer was so.
wasn't pedantic.
Yeah,
The question was the
Okay.
I
all
have a
right.
pedantic question.
Go,
Okay,
go
good.
for it. Go for it.
So I was enjoying the internecine squabbling between the Sulpicians and the
Oh yeah. The
Jesuits, and how it was really all about money. And I enjoyed chapter 14, where, the ex-Jesuit, we find out later, the rationalist,
Yeah.
is like the best preacher. He gives us this beautiful breakdown of, allegorical reading of Joseph in turn
Yes,
reading
yes.
Pharaoh's dream. That worked well.
Mm. I'm glad you think that. It's funny how these things come about, because I'm thinking to myself, I've got to have these 2 guys encounter each other. What would it be like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
but my question is, what motivated you to wait until page 110 to have Robert announce to this minor character, the surgeon? I was a Jesuit.
Oh, why?
And I was like, whoa, really?
Yeah.
Were you?
Yeah, that
And I
share
mean, in
that
some
feeling.
ways it explains a lot, but in some ways it was like, I wondered. Well, I wonder what motivated that choice, because it's a piece of information that my instinct, I think, would have been to use earlier, but I think you probably had a good reason for waiting for him to drop that little bomb
Yeah.
at the very end,
Yeah.
practically. Yeah. Well, what was it?
Well, gosh, what was it? I wanted it. I like to kind of drop little bombs. I mean, I kind of like to surprise people,
Yeah.
and I wanted to surprise people with that. I remembered when I realized Lassalle was a Jesuit. It surprised me.
Well, he was a novice, so he quit pretty.
Well, yeah, but he
Pretty
was
early.
in the order. Okay, he took his first vows.
Okay.
You know, they have this process where you go to school for these various levels, and then you're supposed to teach Latin for some years, and then
Oh.
you can take, theology. So he'd gone through a lot of it, but he hadn't gone to that fourth vow, the one where you,
Okay.
the vow of obedience or something, where you go wherever they send you. And he had been sending, there were apparently thousands and thousands of these petitions that these young priests would write to this superior of the order, asking to go to
To a
here or
particular
there.
place.
He wanted to go to China.
Right. I
Yeah,
remembered
yeah,
that
we talked
from
about
the
that.
beginning.
And so that's why I quit. But anyway, so apparently I think that for a long time that wasn't all that generally known that he was a Jesuit. So like if you read these 19th century scholars debating over his stuff, a lot of them didn't seem to know this. And then later on, a Jesuit, published a couple of letters, and this became, I think, more readily available knowledge. And it does seem to explain a lot. But yeah, I kind of wanted to drop it as kind of like a surprise, like a twist. I wanted it to be a twist.
Felt like a twist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. The first thing that I wrote for this, or well, not the first thing that I wrote, but the first thing that I workshopped for this was actually a section. Brock had to read this whole thing. Section starting when he's like 4 years old, where I sort of cover all that time when he was a Jesuit, and I just thought, nobody's gonna. I mean, I have my limits in terms of old-fashionedness. Like an old-fashioned novel, they would just start at the beginning of the kid's life, like
Right.
Dickens. I was in the shed. This creepy
Christian
guy was
Shandy,
there.
right at his conception.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's not too old-fashioned, though.
I mean, and I like these books, but Jane Eyre. I liked the part when she was a kid at the horrible boarding school. I thought it was great, especially when I was a kid. But it's harder now for people to go with that, And so I thought, well, I'm going to start. In a way, there's a real, like a kind of a schizophrenic aspect to his personality because, he was basically just a scholar for his whole life. And then he comes over here and just dumps head in to this exploring stuff, which he's totally unprepared for. So I kind of wanted it to be a twist and a turn.
Okay.
And I just decided, once I had tried to workshop stuff on his being a Jesuit, and everyone was kind of like ho-hum,
Oh.
I thought, well, let's do it this other way.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I liked it as a surprise twist.
Yeah.
I thought it worked
Yeah.
well, it was effective.
I crafted
And
that a lot. I was
yeah.
like, how can I lay the ground, surprising yet inevitable, how can I lay the groundwork for this thing?
I mean, but I think it gives a sense of like where this fits in the public understanding of who he is, like that it can be a surprise announcement to somebody that he's speaking to,
Yeah.
Well, also, it works, now I think, maybe I understand more, but like you tie off, you have this long Rouen flashback of sort of 11 pages, and then you go back to the present, you tie off the whole thing with Jean's point of view. And
Yeah.
Jean is kind of like not the sharp thinker that Robert is.
Yeah.
He's not a Jesuit.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the other kind. And so Jean's kind of like, you have a line or phrase on page 37, Jean's disquiet. Jean worries about stuff without quite knowing why, he's not a good analyst and all of that. And the Sulpicians need money in the worst way, and, you know, the Jesuits just seem to be outflanking them, and,
Yeah.
so, I mean, like, that kind of works. I mean, that kind of, the sort of dynamic of the doubters versus the adventurers, you know, the Jean-Pierre et Phil and, Henri and Robert.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah. The two, you know, the dad and his brother, and I do think the two sons, there is kind of a
Yeah,
two pairs, you
Yeah.
know, that, yeah.
kind of like.
I don't
yeah.
know if they were really like this. I mean, I can hardly find anything about Henry at all.
Uh-huh.
And with Jean, the brother, who, you know, really kind of screwed Robert over and did a lot of other stuff later. I mean,
Uh-huh.
goes beyond the scope here, but he did a lot of other stuff that really seems a little questionable. Although he was a good priest, he was an ecclesiastic. But, you know, you just kind of ask yourself. And so, like, I came up with the conception basically based just on the chronology of what happened when and how old they were.
Yeah.
Because I thought, here's a guy who's 7 years older, but they both go to Paris at about the same time. One of them in this order that's a brand new order.
Right.
And they're
okay,
mainly about
yes.
Canada.
Yes,
And the other
that's
one
so
in this
interesting.
kind of really prestigious order. And I thought, you know, what would it have been like, really? I have siblings, you know?
Yeah.
And so then you kind of,
Yeah.
that's where it sort of
That,
comes
that's
from.
good. I like that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, generally, in our defenses at this point, I would ask the peanut gallery and the candidate to vacate so that we could discuss whether or not we were going to choose to sign the documents. And I would have the documents with me, but we are behind the curve on the document front. But I will ask, I mean, can we perhaps make a determination without sending people out of the room, a simple yay or nay to the
I
the
think,
MFA?
I think I'm comfortable with
Is
that.
that fair? Okay,
Yes.
all right, very good. Well, I certainly vote yay.
Yeah. Certainly, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's a really,
Well
really
deserved.
a wonderful project.
Very rich
Thank you.
And-
and original.
Like, and, like Pinckney, I wanna read the whole thing,
Yeah,
so.
I'm
me
looking
too.
forward to
Okay.
it. If I thought keeping you here would make you write the rest of it faster, I would fail you. But I don't think that's the case. So we will let you fly free. And if you come back, then we'll know that you always belonged to us, or whatever that saying is.
Yes.
But yeah, we will let you fly free, little bird. You welcome to the rank of Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing.
Great.
Thank you. It's been good. I really liked my experience here. So if I can get some funding, maybe I'll come back.
Good. Well, I hear they're going to be looking for a creative writing teacher.
If I could
At
just
least
crank
one.
out the books,
Yeah.
Yeah,
They-
they might.
you know,
they might
maybe
be
they
needing a
hire me.
couple.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you all for.
Congratulations on
Oh,
your new gig.
I appreciate that. I really appreciate it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, congratulations.
Well, thank you both for joining us. This is above and beyond
Yeah.
what you
Pleasure.
were required
Yeah.
to do. So,
Yeah.
but it's fun, right? I mean,
It was.
when you
It's
get to
fun.
read the beginning of a good
Reading good work is always fun.
novel. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for your excellent and pertinent questions. I feel educated on the background of the book in a way I did not previously feel because of what you all brought up. All right. Well, very good. Thank
for your
you,
time,
Catherine,
for
and
your
I'm
attention,
I'm
and
glad
just
you
for
came back.
The conversation.
Oh, sure.
You know,
Yeah,
yeah.
my pleasure.
I will
Well, we'll
have an
continue.
AI
Yes.
summarize the
Okay.
no, literally, I'll have an AI summarize this,
I believe
and
it.
I will send
Yeah.
you. I will send the summary out so that everybody can review
Interesting.
what we.
I wonder
What we
what
did.
that's
Well, I'm actually
be
going to
like.
use an AI that will make a podcast about this
Oh,
event.
yes, yes.
It'll be
yes.
two characters talking about the thesis.
Make sure my
defense.
avatar is extremely attractive.
Oh, well, how else could it be? Yes, how else could it be? There's a whole.
It's the Swifty
There's a whole. There's a whole row of you back there.
Thank you for coming. Gosh, that was nice. Nobody ever actually goes places in real life.
Sure we do.
Thank you, you guys.
Amy and I had to
How's
set up
everything
for the-
going?
The theater department's sitting on
I
our
was not gonna miss
Carol
this.
this weekend, so we were
Thank
running
you.
around. So I came over here since we
good.
got back from.
Oh my
the-
God.
I got let
Oh, wow,
out.
great.
I have
that
it
off.
till- for January.
Well, it was
Totally got it.
interesting,
Yeah.
defense, right, or whatever.
Wow,
Defense
well,
is
if
not
you
right.
come in early, that's.
But it was
Like,
amazing
I
to find
would like
Catherine's
to
so
know
easy
because
to listen to,
it's-
right? Like, she's one of the few people who listening to her is actually as interesting as reading her
Yeah.
fiction. And
That's
so
not good.
I knew it would be, worth.
Sorry to hear it, but I'm very excited for the
It's cool,
road.
like, it's really cool. It's the first 170 pages, may not even be quite that much.
Real paper. which
It
I'm
really,
still
it really
using.
does feel like it's just starting to heat
I always
up.
have them, I'm always
So,
recycling.
but no, and I think
Everything
it should be,
from
when she
hard
completes it, assuming that it,
I'm sorry,
it
sorry to
goes
hear
on
that,
and
but
that it
I
has
hope you are
begun.
enjoying
It really is a book
the
you should
moments
consider
of the
for
flow
pictures.
state anyhow.
Because it's
Yeah,
right
it was,
here.
it was nice
It's,
because
you
that
know,
particular
come up with
it's,
data rows
its
of money.
history, it fits
Visit
in
all these
right
places
into
that
the
are in my book,
SIU
and also visit my
press,
friends
like,
that you're in there.
milieu, right?
And how often does that
Yeah,
happen?
they say they're gonna confer the degree, the terminal
Well, I guess I
degree.
generally
know.
think
Call
of
you
master
master
problems as utterly
Mistress.
insurmountable. They're usually easier. than
Well
I
done,
thought, but
well done.
That doesn't make them easy.
My
No,
pleasure.
actually, you made it fun, and I appreciate that.
Great, good. No, I mean, it's easy to make fun, you know.